Chase from St. Johnsbury asks, what action will you take regarding regulations on fuel and energy? And I was just thinking, as I've heard from other states, other states are thinking about things like a gas tax holiday, or is there something else that we should be thinking about along those lines? So, Greg, I'll let you start. Regulations on fuel and energy.
Fuel, fossil fuels, it's the energy of the world, the energy of Vermont. They can't make a lot of these, these wind turbines or these solar panels without fossil fuel assistance. It's just the way it is. The energy stations for the cars, the electric stations, the UV stations. So, we can have both. We can have economic development in a clean environment. And we all live, work, and play here, Paul. We all want the same thing. But we also want people to be able to flourish. For the last 30 years, 40 years, the world's going to come to an end if we don't get rid of fossil fuels. It's like, where's that coming from? I remember when I used to visit California as a kid. Oh, Southern California, LA will be in the ocean. That was back in like the late 70s, early 80s. It's still there and it's still thriving. So these fearmongers need to calm down, and they need to really, really work with us. We can do this together. And again, goes back to listening. We're a lot better off when we work together and listen to one another. We all have agendas, Paul, but we're not going to get things done if we're selfish. My dad always taught us that compromise is the art of politics and getting things done. I'm going to fight for my initiatives and the things I believe in, and hopefully I can turn the thinking on the other side. But that's what we're going to fight for the people. Good. Thank you.
All right. Senator Benning, thoughts on regulations regarding fuel and energy on the state level?
Paul, you were kind enough to give us the questions beforehand. I happen to know Chase in this particular situation, and I know that one of his biggest concerns was the new regulation that requires all of our oil tanks to be inspected before we are delivered our next tank of oil. Friday, I spent about an hour with a gentleman on the phone who was incredibly upset because his oil tank was positioned in such a way in his garage that although the inspector could see the floor and could see the fact that there was no leak, he could not get underneath the tank to inspect it and determine whether there were any problem areas. This is absurd. It was started by one of the Chittenden County legislators reacting to Irene, understanding that there were several fuel tanks floating down the river. That's where this all began. But the bottom line is we are now depriving people of the very heating fuel that they need to have to survive the winter. And they cannot afford this piece of legislation. It needs to be repealed. There are several other things that are going on in this conversation. I don't know about either of you, but I happen to be learning how to drive in the 1970s. And my father required me to go down to the gas station to see if at 5:30 in the morning there was a green flag out or a red flag out, or what day of the week it was, and whether our license plate number was an odd or even plate number, depending on the day of the week, in order to get fuel. I knew back then that OPEC had us by the throat. And getting off of oil was a smart idea way back then, oil that was coming from out of the country. We have the ability to manufacture our own. That's not going to happen in Vermont. We don't have oil rigs in Vermont. We can't really discuss that topic in the positions that we're running for. But the attitude we can talk about. Trying to make sure we are energy independent is important. There isn't anybody in the legislature who has fought harder against these 500-foot tall, I'll call them spinning wheels, on top of our mountains. In order to install them, we have to destroy miles of pristine ridgeline and wildlife habitat. Now, back in the 80s, I was very much fighting against Midwestern coal-powered plants that were dumping acid rain on our ridgelines and defoliating our ridgelines. Those are important wildlife habitats. And in order to present any kind of renewable energy in this state, we have to act with intelligence on what kind of renewable energy we're looking at. I'll give
Thank you.
one brief.
They're over.
I'm out of time.
Well, if you want, you can
It's a
include
very
it.
long conversation, and I'm happy to have it anytime.
Well, you can.